So with our first song, we were recognizing that some of the most emotive moments are the moments without the vocals. So carrying this focus on the instrumentation through to How We've Changed, the second song.
Yeah.
I really love how immediately after the lyric, Oh, How We've Changed, we have those piano hits.
Yeah.
I just wondered if we could begin with reflecting on that feature of the song, because it's powerful, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and this goes back to me sort of like musically, instrumentally arranging something in a way that maybe wasn't how you would how you would do it if you were like a session musician who just came in and was told to play a piano part, because that part is very percussive.
Yes, it is.
It's bong, ba ba bum bum bong bong.
Yes.
Do-do-do-do-do.
That's what I love about it.
Thank you. Yeah, and like that's me on keys, and it was more of a. It was designed to sort of make the song sort of start to gallop a little bit more.
Yes.
Just from like an auditory perspective, like I wanted it to kind of like pick up and start to kick a little bit, but changing dynamics between the verses, which are a little bit more subdued, into the chorus it's that dynamic shift is change, right? It is
Yes, exactly.
telling that story from one place to the other, and doing so with a dynamic shift and a rhythmic piano part seemed like a really thoughtful way of doing that.
Yes,
you know?
I felt so. The galloping and the percussive piano totally fits with the theme of change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt that. That's one
Awesome.
of my favorite features of the
Thank you.
the record. Then another moment in the song where the lyrical content is really interesting to think about in relation to instrumental stuff that's happening between lyrics. At one moment, oh, how we'd say, there is nothing on this earth too great to give away. That's a recurring lyric. But then there's wonderful, powerful instrumental section, and then we'd succumb to the popular tune of the day. I think it's interesting to kind of zoom in on that moment lyrically, where there's nothing on this earth too great to give away. We can apply this to songs, of course, and back to the image of sending these songs out into the lake and setting them on fire. We're recognizing that music, obviously has hooks. There's some great hooks in this song, especially in that moment between those two lyrics.
Thanks.
And I just wondered if you had any reflections on everything that's going on there, where I felt myself succumbing to the hooks.
Oh, good.
Instrumentally.
Great.
Which is supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
But the song itself, lyrically, is reflecting on that process happening. And yes, it's great, and it's it's well constructed, and yet, and there is nothing on this earth too great to give away.
I think that the part of there's nothing on this earth too great to give away is sort of referring to like what you said, like creating things and putting it out into the world, making it available for people to hear and listen to in a way that is just not free, but free to experience. People are it's available to experience for people, and then succumbing to the popular tune of the day. I sort of think of this song as being about people who are young, who maybe are sort of not like street rats, but like people who are sort of like street level kids who maybe don't come from much. The first lyric is, we were born at the foot of the museum ruins. And I'm sort of picturing like a city that it's not in the best shape. And people sort of being among that with our feet inches deep in the cinders of that. And I think that's evocative of a number of different things. But sort of growing up and taking pride in your scrappiness, growing up and taking pride in being someone who is, engaging with the loons on the street, and sort of having conversations with people who are outside thinkers and people who are less mainstream, and kind of expanding your horizons in that regard. But then ultimately, as we get older and become more aware of things, taking comfort in life and finding ways to enjoy life more than just being like an angry kid who isn't, receiving all the comforts. Anyways, the part about succumbing to the popular tune of the day, it does tie in nicely with the fact that the tune and the melody is grand, and then it kind of shrinks back down and it gets really small tonally. To me, that's a moment of taking a breath, succumbing and acknowledging that there are reasons that people like things. Conformity is a thing because of comfort, People want to be comfortable, and conformity and the popular tune, in this instance, this metaphor, is something that one might have rebelled against as a punky teenager, but realizing there's a reason that people like top 40 radio, So like, I don't know if I told that story as succinctly as I could have, but I think that's where my mind was at. That's the character having grown up. That's the character having changed. That's the character having discovered that there's a reason adults do things the way that they do it. And typically you don't learn those things until you're an adult.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning that. I mean, when I wrote this song, I didn't fully understand that, and now I have kids and I understand my parents more than I ever did. So I think that
the ongoing how we've changed.
It's a funny thing, and to me that's the journey that the characters in that song take, from being sort of like, kids on the street with chips on their shoulder, into being people who understand and are more forgiving of the world because they've had to grow up in ways.
From the perspective of this record, what role does recognizing and owning being flawed in unusual ways play in the process of evolution and change and growth? Because if we're all changing, it's possible to have the experience of kind of being on a growth trajectory and evolving more under certain conditions than other conditions. And just that lyric about the whole verses I propose, unlike those in the antique cartoons, we were flawed in unusual ways.
Yeah.
I think that might be an important key.
I always am of the belief that your narrator should never be a great person. And when I say great person, because like I like an entirely flawless person.
Yes.
They should always be someone who is maybe not narrator, but your main character.
Yeah.
Should never be a perfect person. That's a better way of putting it. Because in order to be compelling as a character or as a storyteller or as something, trying to get people's attention, if you are like a flawless person, there's nothing inherently relatable about that.
Definitely.
And so I think that in all my songs, I write about people and characters who are less than perfect. And in a way, that's a very self-deprecating thing. It's a way of me to sort of be like, to kind of poke fun at myself, because if I come out and I say, we were flawed in unusual ways, then I'm acknowledging that, like, I'm not going to be perfect throughout this. Mm-hmm. So, like, stick with me regardless if I don't nail a landing on something. And I think that is, in this song, I think of it as sort of being sung by the adult looking back. We were flawed in unusual ways. Because when you're young, you might not necessarily think of yourself as being flawed. But as an adult, you can look back and realize that, okay, I was kind of a jerk for doing it this way, or I was kind of I wasn't thoughtful of other people when I had this opinion on something.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, this relates, I think, to what we were saying about mindfulness and self-editing.
Yeah.
But self-editing one's life.
Yeah.
And there's one way in which we can do this, where we're just concerned about how we're coming across and we hide things from others' view. But then there's a mature kind of self-editing where there's a taking ownership, and it's transformative as I recognize and don't resist having these unusual flaws.
I think so. I think it's an exercise in self-awareness to be like, I am not perfect. I wasn't perfect. I'm not going to be perfect as we proceed, whether it's me in life, me as the narrator of this song, me as the character in the song. And I think it's just important for me to know, or to make it clear that the person we're singing about is not a great beacon of perfection. Because I think that's what makes it captivating, but I think it's also what makes characters and songs relatable to people.
Yeah, the beacon of perfection doesn't get to have the "Oh, how we've changed" experience, because Act 1, beacon of perfection. Act 3, beacon of perfection.
Exactly. There's got to be some hero's journey there.
Totally.
And I think that, acknowledging up front, there's ways, during the exposition of a story in which you could say, this guy walked out on his wife with a newborn. Okay, and you go, oh, he's not a good person. Or this person, bet on sports and then threw the game as they were doing it. Oh, that's not a good person. But I don't know if it's lazy or if it's just very succinct to just in the second line say I'm flawed. This person is flawed. We were flawed. I'm flawed. It's a very quick way of getting to the point of knowing okay, this person is not virtuous necessarily in all facets.
Just to briefly talk about one of your new songs from the challenge.
Yeah, please.
To the first prompt that we had, Well, I really love that song, Might I Sip From Your Well, and it's grappling with there's a situation where a couple of characters need to get by, and there is... So the lyric that feels pertinent is what determining factors might abridge from the chapters when I'm destined to fail. So these characters, there's an awareness that as they do what they need to do to get by, they will be perceived as imperfect, perhaps as villainous, as they should feel ashamed, or they are guilty of
they're lazy.
Failing. Precisely.
They're living off of taxpayer dollars or whatever, and I think
these are details left out of what determining factors might abridge from the chapters.
Right.
There's an awareness the story will be told that doesn't include the details.
And it's funny you bring that song up, because in my mind those characters could be the characters from the song How We've Changed. People being scrappy, and it's people having to be living down at street level to sort of get by for a while, and then coming up and out of that. But how do we get by in the meantime? I hadn't put that together, but in my mind, those could be the same two people.
And these characters know that they will be judged, but we're leaving today. That's the journey in the chorus of your new song is, who knows what they'll know, who knows what they'll say, who knows where we'll go, but we're leaving today.
Yeah.
And the emphasis is we're taking this action.
Yeah.
And yes, we will be judged. Who knows what the judgments will be? But we're doing this. And so they're on their growth trajectory.
I think that's also, I think, a statement about learning to not care.
Yeah.
And that's also growth, and that's also change.
Yeah.
And that's also maturation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
The third song on the record, I think, is one which kind of encapsulates that journey with you being the character.
It's very personal, that one. Yeah.
All at once, because we have the recurring lyric, all at once I'm afraid of myself, all at once I am me. That then only at the end evolves into all at once I am sure of myself, all at once I am me.
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting to bring into this conversation that we're having. Is it by virtue of allowing oneself to be oneself in a way that scares one, that eventually one becomes, by the end of the song, sure of oneself?
I think absolutely. Because at some point in time, you have to realize, I'm still doing this, that you can only change so much about yourself. you're not going to be. I mean, I could only change so much about myself and only get so far from where I started before I start really becoming not me, you know? And so that song is about my hometown in particular, Orono, Minnesota. It's a really nice town.
Yeah, that's the opening lyric.
Yeah, exactly. And I moved there when I was 12, and we moved there in the summertime. And when you're 12, it's a really interesting time to have such kind of a cataclysmic change in your life, because I don't know if so much of like the anxiety I started to experience at that time, or, you know, strife between my parents and I, was because I was angry that we moved and we were in a different situation, or it's because I was just entering puberty.
Right, exactly.
You know? And then I was a freshman in high school, and another period of time when, you know, the paradigm shifts and the world kind of opens up in a new way, and the people you're interacting with are maybe slightly more adult-like, you know? You're seeing seniors who have beards and you're like still a kid, you know what I mean? You just like are experiencing this new world. And like a week and a half into my high school experience, 9/11 occurred. And so the world opened up at this time in a way that was like, is it because this horrible world event just occurred and everyone's on edge and changing, or is it because I am in high school and I also now have this whole new exposure to people who are talking about things differently? And so there's these two sort of events that sort of happen, like starting high school and 9/11, and then moving to my hometown and kind of hitting puberty and like, you know, going through things at the time. So I called it all at once because it's hard for me to differentiate what the cause and effect was, because these things all kind of happen at once. But as an adult, I think back on my hometown, and growing up, I think there's always a little bit of like, I got to get the hell out of this town. But now as someone who, you know, at the time was thinking about starting a family and thinking about, you know, needing space and going back and thinking, where would be a good place to go get those things? And of course, the idea of my hometown pops up and thinks, well, should we go there? Should we move there? And we haven't. We didn't. But again, it's kind of that thing about putting myself in the shoes that my parents were in when they were deciding where they wanted to raise their family and making those choices and bringing us there. And I don't know if there's a better place in the world to raise your kids, frankly. Like it was pretty great. You know, aside from the awkward teen years that I went through when I lived there. But generally, in terms of safety, in terms of education and things like that, it's a good place. And the song is sort of, again, coming from the perspective of a kid who's rebellious and, you know, thinking that sort of the traditions and cultural norms of that community are silly or not appreciating them while they're going through them. But then as I'm getting older and learning about myself, I'm realizing that I am a byproduct of that town. And that town is a big part of why I am who I am. So, but it's sort of framed on those sort of events of moving there, starting kind of my like entry into teen years and adulthood, and also starting high school right as 9/11 was occurring, and sort of instances of things happening all at once, and I can't point to the main determining factor as to why they affected me the way that they did, because there was multiple things occurring at the same time.
Yeah, very interesting. So yeah, the song is recognizing and drawing attention to the complexity of life. We want to narrate what's occurring, but it's beyond our grasp.
Yeah.
And so this, that's what the song is about. And yet it's recognizing that, of course, we're going to try and create these stories about what's happening.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Totally.
And then there is this focus on the self, too. And the encounter with the self and it being scary, and then there being this moment of kind of befriending the self.
Yeah, I think as we get to know ourselves, as we grow up, and as we become comfortable knowing who we are, and acknowledging our shortcomings and our strengths, the notion of being yourself becomes less scary. I think that oftentimes as teens, when we're awkward, or we're people who are growing up and we're awkward and we're uncomfortable and we're not conversationalists and we're not, we're not having success in relationships yet and things like that, it's really scary when people say, just be yourself. It's really scary to do that when you don't feel like, A, you know who you really are, and you don't have confidence in yourself, right? And so I think that is sort of a nod or a wink to being someone who in their adolescence who is experiencing these things and who's going through this time in their life totally uncomfortable with themselves and not knowing where they fit in the social ladder and not knowing if they're a jock or they're a theater kid or they're a math lead or they're a cheerleader, whatever. And I think that there's just like an interesting story to be told when teen movies always focus on the cliques, right? But like, to me, there's more interesting characters in the kids who don't know what they are.
Right.
And so I think I was a kid who didn't really know where he was. I think I was liked, but I don't think I ever felt at home in one particular social circle. And so who was I? What was myself? I guess I was trying to figure that out. I was afraid of being myself because I didn't know what other people would think of me. But once I became sure of myself, and then I was all at once me.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing that urges that song along.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because we can obviously back to this theme of conforming you to comforts. Like to be able to cast myself as the jock. I'm not able to cast myself as the jock, but to cast oneself in a particular role is comforting.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, there's a lot happening all at once internally, and some is not going to align with this identity of jock that I've cast myself in. So there's something interesting that happens for the character who is encountering themselves and is afraid and is not kind of typecasting themselves or is confused. Like, what am I? I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not that.
Yeah.
Because by virtue of not casting oneself in any given kind of generic role, there is scope to engage with more aspects of oneself and
I think
find
so.
oneself.
I think it's a thing that's good.
Yeah.
I think it's really good to not necessarily know where you fit in when you're younger in ways, because it does give one the resolve to search for that.
Yeah.
And the people who are sort of prescribed an identity when they're young, that can be really, I think, stunting.
Yeah.
That's that's not a judgment on people who get prescribed an identity when they're young, whether it's a jock or a theater kid or whatever. Usually it's because they're good at something, which is great.
Yeah.
But like, I think oftentimes we don't hear stories about the kids who aren't prescribed something.
Yes.
We don't hear about the kids who aren't necessarily great at one thing.
Yeah. It's harder to tell that story.
Yeah.
In a relatable way.
Yeah.
Which relates in turn to the experience of the young person who is living that reality, because the story that they're telling themselves about themselves is it's harder to.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is unusual and hard.
Let's bring the instrumentation in with that one, because I think that this is an instance where Green's strings are particularly resonant. So, and the way that they come in after that lyric, all at once I am me.
Yeah.
Could you reflect a little bit on the strings in this song?
I think strings are... So here's an interesting part of that. I've made the statement several times that conformity is... There's a reason people conform to things. And many years ago, I was talking to somebody I knew who was a musician, and I said, I want to get strings on this song. And they said, don't do that. And I said, why? And they said, because strings are like the easiest way to bring beauty into a song. It's like the easiest, like most like schmaltzy way to like make something beautiful. And I was like, okay. And I think in those moments of the song, this song that you're talking about, I think I wanted those sort of instrumental like breaks. Maybe they're almost more like blossoms, because like I make the line and then they sort of blossom into these instrumental parts. And I wanted those moments to sort of be like, you have a break to sort of think about what was just said and experience the beauty of what was just said in learning to be oneself and learning to be one's own advocate throughout their life or whatever. And I wanted to make that really a pretty moment. So of course I went against what I was told and brought in strings there. But to me, that goes back to realizing that in conforming to bringing in strings, just because that's the easiest way to make something pretty, is also acknowledging that like not everything has to be against the grain. Like sometimes there's a reason that bringing in strings is the most beautiful thing you can do.
Yeah.
And so to me, it was sort of like a moment of acknowledging that like I don't have to make every moment of this album quirky or weird. Like I can do the tried and true thing here to make it beautiful, because it's supposed to be beautiful.
Yeah. This evokes beauty, and there is an intention at this moment in the song to appreciate the beauty of the young person's attempt to truly make sense, tell themselves a story about themselves which is true.
I think so, yeah.
And there's something beautiful about that, and you want to convey that there's something beautiful about that. So yeah, that's an interesting enough thing that you're trying to draw attention to the beauty of.
Yep.
Let's do the tried and tested thing to highlight, to flag up.
Yeah, right. But then side note here, in my own personal endeavors, was told not to do that at one point because it would have been cheesy or something. But like, this song is sort of about, and the other songs too so far have sort of been about like realizing that there's a reason people do things a certain way, and learning to accept that, but also be aware that maybe it's not always the best thing, but acknowledging that that comfort is an okay thing to experience sometimes. And strings in that moment was comfortable and beautiful and cool, and it's okay to just live with like beautiful and cool sometimes.
Totally.
You're not trying to like, screw it up some way and make it weird, or because sometimes I tend to do that. I'll tend to like want to make something sound quirky and weird just because I don't want it to sound normal. But like, whatever. I think that particular moment you asked about was particularly apt because it sort of feeds into the ideas that we've already discussed.
Absolutely. Yeah.